Emerson, when did you first acquire an interest in dyslexia?
Well, I think that you have to go further back than that. You know, my wife and I were both very interested in the field of developmental disabilities initially, perhaps, 40 years ago. And what became apparent as we were working with children and families that were dealing with disabilities was that the field of learning disabilities, and in particular, it's the subfield of learning disabilities in reading, was dynamic and growing, and research was happening, and practice was exploding, et cetera, whereas in the field of developmental disabilities, it was kind of emerging more slowly, let's say. And so that we were really attracted to the field of learning disabilities and dyslexia in particular.
You mentioned your wife. I'd like to just congratulate you, along with Georgette, for the well-deserved honor which you both received yesterday at the annual conference, the Margaret Bird Rawson Lifetime Achievement Award. So well-deserved.
It
so
was
congratulations.
Most unexpected.
Please explain how you joined this interest in learning disabilities with your love of the law, how you've been able to mesh. Did the interest in learning disabilities come before you went to law school?
I think when I first started to practice law, as a parent of a child with a disability, I was involved in organizations in school, et cetera, with other parents with similar issues. And they would come to me because I was an attorney and ask me about legal questions regarding the rights of their child or what they were going through, et cetera. And I found that these were people I liked doing business with. These were people with real issues. These were people that had their feet on the ground. And so I allowed that part of my practice to expand to the extent that that's all I do now. I represent people that, mainly parents that have children with disabilities, basically in educational advocacy and in special needs planning, specialized trusts, et cetera, for children who are likely to need support for the rest of their lives. But that's, I wouldn't have it any other way. These are people that really know what's important.
Are there any legal cases that you are particularly proud of the outcome and your participation in the case? And I'd be very interested in that, and I'm sure others would also.
There's two cases, actually, in particular. One case called Lascari went to the Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey, which is our highest court. And it took me 8 years, and I lost, 3 times before the appellate division. And then we won unanimously before the Supreme Court. Now, this was a child who, by the time we finished the case, was married and had a child of his own, okay, and couldn't read in high school. And we got him into a specialized school that taught him how to read and be successful. The Supreme Court of the state of New Jersey unanimously indicated for the first time that the burden should be on school districts to come forward and prove that they were providing an appropriate program rather than have the burden on the parents to do so, and a number of other things. Eventually, the Supreme Court of the United States overruled that in another case, but most states have come back to implementing the Lascari philosophy that, in essence, school districts have the expertise, have the knowledge, and have the financial wherewithal and resources to be able to support what they're offering, whereas parents rarely have any of that. So that placing the initial burden on the school districts in education cases was one. And the other one was a case called J.E. versus the Division of Developmental Disabilities in New Jersey, which was the first case where, and again, the New Jersey Supreme Court decided that the process of appealing concerns regarding the treatment of individuals with developmental disabilities in state institutions should be determined by a court, an impartial court of law, and not by the very agency that was providing the service. Up until then, the agency that provided the service was where you appealed to if you were concerned about treatment of a person with a developmental disability in a state institution. But now all of these complaints have to, at a particular point in time, go to an impartial tribunal, a court of law, which made a big difference in the state. I was very proud of both those cases.
Well, you should be. They sounded like very important decisions. Do you have any mentors that you can think of who inspired you?
Oh my God, there's so many. I mean, we were just talking to Nancy Hennessy. Nancy Hennessy is perhaps one of the most generous and knowledgeable people I know. Louisa Moats, always the smartest person in the room. Reed Lyon, through his work with the government, dedicated his life essentially to discovering what we know about reading. Jack Fletcher, my goodness, my wife, whose generosity is unbounded, and there's just so many others.
And you must know that you've been a role model for others, many others, including myself. So you are, too, very generous. How has the field changed since you became involved?
Oh, it's, well, like I said, one of the reasons I became involved is because it was so dynamic. Think of everything that's happened in the last 20 years or even 15 years. I mean, at one point, IDA, had the answers when nobody else even knew the questions. And now the questions have been asked by, the researchers. We've gotten the information necessary to support what IDA appeared to know all along. We've just learned within the last decade that the brain is malleable, that we can make changes in children's brains if we get them early enough so that we can, if we intervene in a timely manner, they don't have to fail. And we know, so in the last 15, 20 years, we've learned how to intervene successfully. We've learned that successful intervention will make changes in the brain of the child who is born with the potential for acquiring a disability, that therefore no longer has to experience that potential before getting the help they need. Oh, it's really an extremely exciting time right now.
How long have you been involved with IDA? And I'm speaking, going back to your time in New Jersey.
Well, I think I started with IDA specifically and the Orton Dyslexia Society by going to New Jersey branch conferences. And I would go to the conferences, learn about the science, etc. Eventually, somebody asked me to give a talk because I was an attorney that did advocacy. I got involved with the branch, and that was probably about 25 years ago. And then, as Nancy Hennessy is well aware, because she was with the New Jersey branch at the time, we had a conference. I forget which one it was, but it was in Washington, D.C. And my wife and I were driving back from D.C., and we realized that of the maybe 20 sessions we had gone to, each one had a different definition or perspective of what dyslexia was or why a reading disability occurred. And we felt that that was inconsistent with our purpose of trying to get some consensus and forward movement. So we started working on the definition, and I started working very closely with the New Jersey branch, and that's where it started.
Well, there are also stories about your efforts, which really led to, eventually, your efforts that started in New Jersey that eventually led to the IDA definition that went beyond IDA to the federal level. And can you kind of explain that process?
It's a long story. I'll try to be brief. We, recognizing that there were so many different definitions being used in the research, it was clear that the research was not forming the kind of consensus that would have made a significant difference at the time. So we I think we looked at 25 different definitions that were actually used in the research. And for a period of about 3 years, I corresponded with different experts in the United States and in Canada. And believe it or not, they were responding to me, which I found incredibly interesting. And every time somebody responded, I'd revise what was the rubric for a definition at the time, taking something out, putting something in. And eventually we came up with something that most people felt was appropriate, brought that to the attention of IDA, and then had a consensus meeting of scientists that came together with Jack Fletcher, Reed Lyon, the Shawitzes, Byron Rourke, Bruce Pennington. I mean, the names are just, these are all heroes way above my pay scale at the time, but brought them together, and in about 2 days, after almost 5 years of work, in about one afternoon, these people came together and crafted a definition in a hotel room, I remember, in New York City, that was subsequently adopted by the National Institutes of Health and used to support the research on reading. So we began to get researchers using the same definition so that we would get consensus as to the cohort that they were studying and the results that they were achieving.
I have to tell you, that was a real milestone. It had a huge impact. And I can recall a conversation with you, Katz, who claimed it was the highlight of his career. And you made that happen. Your longevity on the IDA National Board, I think, may be unsurpassed. You have held numerous positions. Would you please tell us what those positions have been?
Well, I have no idea why I was on the board for so long, but I think it was because perhaps I had something to offer the individual that was in charge. I know that I was Gordon's secretary. I think I was secretary for Marcia. Then I was a vice president, and then I was the secretary again. And then somebody nominated me as president subsequently. So I've held a number of different roles. And for a dyslexic, to hold the role as secretary for the International Dyslexia Association was kind of challenging. I remember, and you probably remember, when I would do the roll call and mispronounce just about everybody's name, including my own at one time.
You had a term as president. I served with you during that time on the board. What were your goals during your presidency, and what do you feel were your most significant accomplishments during that time?
I recall my goals better than I recall my accomplishments. There were some challenges that we had during my presidency. However, one of the things that I've always wanted to do was empower people at the grassroots, or empower our membership, empower our branches, because, excuse me, like I said, that's where the magic happens. The magic happens at the point where the instruction is being given. The magic doesn't happen in the ivory tower. So empowering people to do that is what I wanted to do, part of what I wanted to do. The other thing was to form alliances with other organizations, because there's no reason for organizations that are private nonprofit organizations with missions that are similar not to work together. There's no competition in this field. It doesn't make any sense to have competition in a field where you share a mission. So bringing together like-minded organizations, I think, was very important. And so those are the two big ideas I hope to accomplish. I think we made some movement in that direction, but during my presidency, as you know, we had some challenges with changing executive directors. We had some other challenges with purchasing the building that we're in and fixing up the building. So the broader hopes and desires and goals that I had to be kind of put on the back burner while emergencies that needed to be addressed at the time were faced.
Yes. You mentioned your desire to collaborate with other organizations, and that has been, I would say, another hallmark of your tenure on the board and actually of your life in general. But I think it also was reflected in your long-term commitment to being IDA's representative on the NJCLD. And would you please tell us about your work with these organizations many of which you feel are partners in mission, to use your term?
Well, I think the NJCLD is a wonderful organization. We deal with other agencies, other organizations like ASHA and LDA, and there's so many others, in a way that we come up with white papers that we can all, or the vast majority of us, agree on, etc. I think that there are a number of organizations I've been involved in the past that have had wonderful success, in like the National Center for Learning Disabilities, for instance, a wonderful organization. Similar mission, very, very different structure, very, very different funding, very, very different resources. We should be able to come together in more joint projects than we do. And that's, part of what my goal was as president. That's part of what my goal still is.
I'm wondering if there's anything you would like to add that I haven't asked you, thoughts about IDA's future, for instance, or anything else that you might like to mention.
Well, I think IDA faces a challenge, at the present time, because I think that, like I said before, there was a time when IDA had the answers and nobody else even knew the question. Okay, and that's important to consider now, because the questions are out there. The answers are being recognized by other organizations, other agencies, etc. IDA is no longer alone. The IDA is no longer leading the march in this field. We have to recognize that what we've learned through what we've done for the last, this is our 63rd conference, is perhaps meaningful to a broader population, so that we can expand our mission to continue to be leading the way to enlightenment.
Well, thank you, Emerson, for all you have done for IDA and for children with reading disabilities and dyslexia.
Thank you, Karen. You've been a great help. Thank you.